Welcome to the Fran Snyder Podcast, where I talk to artists and music fans to explore how music connects us through great stories and experiences. Brought to you by the Listening Room Network. Today's guest, Rupert Wates. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thank you, Fran. Yeah, nice to see you and hear you.
Likewise. You're in Colorado at the moment, is that right?
Yeah, I'm at my little cabin in a small town called Salida. It's about right in the middle of Colorado in the mountains, between the Rockies and the Sangre de Cristo Mountain. But my other base is New York City, as you mentioned.
Right. And of course, we should probably start with the fact that you have an Alabama accent.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? Yeah.
Where are you from exactly?
I'm from London, England. Came to America. I think it was the fall of 2006. So this is coming up for the 13 years I've been here. And I had a green card for about 10 years, and then I got a US citizenship 2 years ago. But it hasn't changed my accent, I don't think.
I was curious whether you had been a recording artist, touring performer before you came to the United States. Was this just doing what you did before in a different place?
No, not really. When I lived in London, I was really a house songwriter for a publishing company to whom I'm still signed. And my job was to write songs really for other people. I was never really encouraged to believe that I could be a performer myself until I went to Paris, which I did in the year 2000. And I lived there for 5 years, and the French encouraged me to believe that I could sing and play guitar at the same time. Even singing in English to French audiences, they seemed to accept that. And that worked for a while, but then I realized that there was a limited future in, singing in English to a French audience. So came to America, and I have found that America has lived up to its promise. In my case, certainly as the land of opportunity. That's what it has been for me, for sure.
Excellent.
It's really enabled me to fulfill that particular dream that I had.
Yeah, I'm very fond of where I'm from, which is Montreal, Canada, and I still love the country. I'm still a Canadian citizen, even though I've been in the United States since 78, 79. But I do recognize that my life is almost certainly better because I moved to the States as a kid than it would have been if I'd stayed in Canada. Mm-hmm. But my Canadian passport is my get out of jail free card if I need it.
We'll get into that now, but maybe another time. Yeah, but I've got dual citizenship too, so I can run back to the UK if I really need to. And certainly for the healthcare, I think I might do that. Because I still think the national health is a very valuable institution, which we have in England. We don't have it in America.
Yeah. So what was the transition like? So you said you weren't really a touring act
No, not at all.
Full time until you came to the United States. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I came to America. There are just so many opportunities in America. Obviously, right now, most of those opportunities have been temporarily closed down. But you can play 200 gigs in a year in America and not play the same venue twice. There aren't 200 gigs in the UK, believe me. There aren't that many. Apart from the fact that, being English, I was always, as you might find, the same thing being Canadian. Coming from somewhere else is definitely a point in your favor. It adds a certain interest, here in America. So being from England certainly has generally worked in my favor here. So I started to play a lot more, and I noticed that I was beginning to make a living just playing gigs. I didn't really think it would be possible. People always told me that it wouldn't be possible, that it was impossible, and we can talk about that as well later on. But I found that it was possible to make a living playing live.
And you started, did you start in New York or what was your starting point in the United States?
Well, I started playing in New York, but New York, let me tell you, as you probably know, I'm sure, is one of the worst places in the world to make a living as a musician.
Sure.
The deals there are terrible. It's good from the point of view of resume and networking and meeting people and showcasing, but to make a regular living as a singer-songwriter, New York is probably the worst place in the whole world you could pick. It just doesn't work the way it used to in the 60s, when you could walk into a coffee house and get signed by a record label. Dream on. That doesn't happen. I've played all those venues, the Bitter End, the Rockwood Music Hall, Christopher Street Coffee House, all the living room, all the well-known venues in New York. I've played them all. And I don't think I ever made a dime at any of those places, but they were good resume gigs. Started to make a living, to answer your question, when I left New York, came to the Midwest, the Deep South and the Far West. And that was when it really started to work for me, in the small towns.
You mentioned those places. Was that a result of touring, or did you move from New York to some other location?
No, I've never wanted to leave New York, but about 6 years ago, I bought a little cabin in Colorado, which is where I am right now. This is a second base for me, and that's totally transformed touring for me, because I can get anywhere in America within usually one night on the road. From either here or New York, I can be anywhere in America with just one night on the road. Right. I can get to the West Coast from here in about 19 hours. From New York, obviously, I've got the whole of the East Coast and parts of the Eastern Midwest. So that's what really enabled touring. It made touring work for me, having the two bases. That's a big luxury. We have to work out how we can sublet when we're not here. It's a complicated thing, but it's that's what enabled touring for me, among other things, certainly. But I've never wanted to lose my base in New York City.
Excellent. And at what point did you start making records?
Oh, I was always recording in London, but as I say, I was recording for other people mostly, and I didn't even do my own vocals. I would always work with session vocalists. But I did a lot of playing in London, overdubbing guitar parts, piano parts, backing vocals. I never did lead vocals. But when I came to America, in Paris, I was living in Paris when I made my first full-length CD, because that was when I started to believe that I could make it as a performer. But I can't bear to listen to those recordings now. I mean, I don't know how you feel about your early recordings, but recording is it's a craft that you have to learn. Can't just walk into a studio and expect things to fall into place, And I've having done all these gigs, I must have played about 1,500 gigs, I think, since I came to America. I now know my own voice and what I should be doing with it. When I started, I really had no idea. It's been a very long learning curve for me. Recording, performing, playing, singing, all of it. It's taken a long time. But now I think I understand. You find it. I'm now in a position where I know what I'm doing.
I can certainly relate to that. It took me a long time to realize that I didn't have to write at the very edge of my vocal capabilities or my guitar capabilities, so that every song is like, every performance of a song was kind of like watching ice skating. It could go horribly wrong at any moment.
I hear you.
And I just had way too much material like that, just really just pushing my edges.
Me too. For years I was trying to write pop. Well, I'm not a pop singer. It took me a long time to realize that. I'm not a blues singer. I can't sing the blues to save my life. But I tried, like we all did, and failed miserably. One of the things that I want to mention this now, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but one of the means through which I've really discovered myself as a musician is Concerts in Your Home, the Listening Room Network. I think that's a very, very good tool for musicians to find out where their real skills lie, to play those gigs, play house concerts.
Yeah, there's something about house concerts, and I often make the parallel of how comedians study the audience. And there's something about playing, clubs or even a theater where you don't get the visceral response from the audience, so that you can learn what's working and what's not.
Right.
And comedians really make a science of it, and they're so diligently watching the audience, exploring timing, seeing if they can pause a little bit longer in that little spot of the joke, watching people's eyes to see if people are getting lost in the details of the joke. Yeah. And when you play in places where you're not getting that immediate feedback, like a laugh, because a comedian gets immediate feedback. They know right away whether the joke worked or not.
Sure.
With songwriters, we're kind of guessing. And especially if you're playing for an audience that you can't see. Yeah. There's something really brilliant about playing in a house concert where, the first row is 2 feet away, and you can see at least 20, 30 faces in detail if you have glasses on. And you can tell if they're about to tear up. You can tell, how how forcefully they're laughing at the jokes.
Right.
So I think it's a great education for artists playing house concerts.
Yeah. But
especially if they pay attention.
Well, yes, so that's the crucial element, isn't it?
There is a downside to that, though, and that is the fact that house concert audiences are so generous that you can put in a very mediocre performance and think you're a rock star, because they can be so accommodating, so friendly, so non-critical sometimes.
I think so. Yeah.
And I think it's possible for artists to
get complacent.
For sure. Have you struggled with that at all in terms of having to check in with self-awareness?
Well, yes. I mean, I don't think the audiences have been overindulgent to me, but certainly you find when house concerts are my comfort zone now. Really, house concerts are where I feel most, at home. And when you leave your comfort zone and I play in a bigger space, suddenly you find things don't work, which do work in the house concert situation. That's very educative, and it's quite a shock. That has happened. It's not that I need to improve my game as a performer, but I often do find that different material is required, certainly.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain amount of shifting gears, learning there are things that work here that don't work on a big stage, and vice versa.
For me, the goal would be to recreate the house concert feeling in a big room, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what a great performer does? He or she makes you feel that you are in your living room with him or her alone, and the rest of the world doesn't exist. That would be great if I could do that in a big space.
In our second podcast, I explored this subject with Aaron English, who you probably know, and we got into the idea that there's certain things that being on a big stage requires you to do things in a bigger way, and it affords you the luxury of doing the rock star things, doing the power moves, the things that would otherwise go unnoticed if you're 200 rows back or 50 rows back. So there's a certain aspect of playing to the space, and where house concerts, those types of moves can look ridiculous.
They certainly would look ridiculous. Yeah.
And there's a certain intimacy with house concerts that demands authenticity, I think was the word that he used. We don't want you putting on any airs. We know. No. There's no fourth wall.
It's a truthful arena, but when I'm playing a bigger space, all this summer I've just been doing outdoor shows, which I don't really enjoy, but we have to do it. And I find that when I'm pushing for my voice or for effect, it doesn't work. When I bring things back down and just relax and try to create an intimacy even in that space, my impression is that it's working better, but I might well be wrong about that.
No, outdoor gigs certainly make it tougher to create that feeling of intimacy, and also creating a situation where you can hear yourself as well as you might indoors. And if you don't hear yourself well, it becomes really, really critical to not start pushing and doing the things that sacrifice your voice. So you've done I don't know how many CDs, but you've been quite prolific over the years. Do you have a number?
I think I've done 12 solo CDs, 11 or 12, yeah. All of those, except for one, were recorded in the US. So yeah, I got a lot of material, but I can only really bear to listen to the last 2 or 3,
Well, may it forever be that way. You're just getting, that much better.
I hope so.
And you've also done a handful of poetry books. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I've done a book of short stories which I wrote when I was in Paris, because I was working partly as a journalist when I lived in Paris. So I did a lot of writing, and then I did a lot of fiction writing at the same time, some of which was published in small magazines. So I put them I compiled them into an anthology, these short stories, and I occasionally sell those on Amazon. I could also sell them at gigs, probably. And I've written a little short novel as well, which also was written in France and based on a French true story. But I think prose writing is to use an appropriate metaphor, is from a different chapter of my life. I only write songs now. Really.
Oh, okay. So it's not something you've continued. I had the impression.
I find that I have to focus my creative energies, and I try to husband them. I don't have any left for other stuff. And I think you as a lyricist, I'm sure, would agree that there's a thin line anyway between writing poetry and writing song lyrics. I mean, people argue about the difference all the time, but certainly a good song lyric will stand up as a poem. I think.
Yeah, it's amazing how I think in a song the melody can make an okay lyric outstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And with poetry, it has to be outstanding on its own.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
I think songs give you a little leeway, but also, a bad melody or a bad song could actually obscure some really great poetry.
Yeah, well, I won't name any names here, but I can think of a few. Right, yes. Yeah. Yes.
You've had a few different types of careers, which inform what you do now.
Yes.
How has recording changed for you in terms of technology, the do-it-yourself ethos? Have you done more and more at home, or do you still use studios?
No, I never record at home. I like to work with a good engineer. I mean, obviously we have great equipment now, but I think it's only really as good as the person that's behind the desk, and I find the engineer still makes an enormous difference. Mm-hmm. And the guy that I work with now on Long Island is by far the best engineer that I've ever had, and I will go a long way to work with him, no matter how many changes in the gear, no matter what the state of his own desk may be. I will always come back to work with him. But anyway, in terms of the recording itself, for me, I did years of working in studios where you were agonizing over digital corrections, trying to make it perfect, multi-layering stuff, and it was horrible. It was a horrible experience. There was no fun in it really at all. And these days I do all my preparation beforehand. I work for a year on the songs and I play them live as often as possible. And I go into the studio and all my last 3 CDs were done in less than 5 hours. That doesn't include mixing, but 1, I saved a lot of money. And 2, it was just very, very cathartic for me to go in there and just perform, capture it, and then leave. I don't like to hang around studios. I think they're very artificial and rather, I don't know, I find them airless in every sense. I like to do my job and then get out as quickly as possible with a good performance. So all the work for me is done beforehand, not in the studio.
So you're really meticulous about using the road, using live gigs to really hone in on your performance and figuring out exactly how you want to play that song once you get in the studio.
Absolutely. I mean, recording is very stressful, I mean, whether you're aware of it or not, it's a very high pressure environment and you have to do as much homework as possible. That includes knowing exactly how you're going to phrase something, knowing where you're going to breathe, leaving aside all the guitar voicings and tunings. All that should be done months beforehand. You can't go into a studio unprepared. It's not going to work, especially if it's an expensive studio. It's going to be no fun. So I am, yes, meticulous about my preparation. I love to record. To record a CD is really what my life is all about. Even though very few people are buying CDs, I will always record them because I can't afford it. I mean, they pay for themselves. I think that's about the most you can expect from recordings these days. It cost me probably about $5,000 total to do a CD. To make that back, I have to sell about 400 CDs, and I usually do that in about 6 months. My CDs pay for themselves; they don't make a living. And I'm sure your listeners, other musicians, will agree that you can't make a living from recordings anymore, but you can make them pay for themselves. So for that reason, I will go on making them. Because it's it's the most satisfying thing for me to record a good CD.
And you said you've done 12 of them since 2006 or
Yeah,
something?
11 or 12.
Yeah.
The list is on my website. I've lost count, to be honest. I do one every 18 months. That's my
Right, right. I'd like to go ahead and shift a little bit and tell our viewers that, number one, you've been hands down the most successful artist at using the Listening Room Network in terms of getting shows, the number of bookings per year
Yep.
for many, many years. And obviously, once you pull ahead to a certain degree, it does afford you some advantages in terms of being well known in the network. But
Right.
but that certainly is not to understate your work ethic and your talent and how diligently you've worked at touring. So I'd love to explore a few things with you in terms of if you can think back to the early days, back when we were called Concerts in Your Home, and because you joined fairly early on,
2008, I think it was.
2008, and we launched in 2006. So you were fairly early in terms of touring. What has been your MO? From the outside, it certainly looks like you just never want to be home, but I know there's a bigger strategy there, and I'm curious. Are there some basic requirements to make a tour work for you? What is the bar?
Well, obviously, we're talking about a different time period when touring was you could do it full time. I think it will come back, and let's assume that it will. Well, it's a fairly simple equation for me. When I'm on the road, I know that my average costs are going to be about $45 a day. Call it $50 a day. That includes tolls, gas, occasional motels. It averages out to about $50 a day. I don't include food in that because you have to eat wherever you are. So you're looking at $50 a day. If I go on tour for 3 weeks, that's 21 days. That's about $1,000. You're looking at probably for a 3-week tour. Probably a bit less. It'll probably be between $750 and $1,000 for a 3-week tour. I know that my gigs average about $400 per gig. That's the average. You can make perfectly well you can make a lot more than that. You can also make less. So it averages out at about 400 gigs. I only need to play, 3 gigs in those 3 weeks to make that tour turn a profit. So any gigs more than 3 in those 3 weeks will be turning me towards profit. I aim to play probably about 10 gigs in that 3-week period, maybe 12. So it's fairly easy to calculate what the tour is going to make and lose. I found those numbers are very consistent as I look back over past tours. They haven't changed very much. I mean, my average revenues climb up a little bit, $50 a year, maybe. They were $250 5 years ago. Now they're more like $400 a gig. I know how to make a tour work pretty much, unless some disaster strikes halfway through, like you get a fire or your car is wrecked or you lose your voice, you can't sing for 2 weeks, whatever it might be. So that's financially how it works for me. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it does. It's a good starting point. So do you prefer to do long bouts of touring, like 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time? Or if you had the choice to just go out for weekends, is that better for you?
It's almost impossible to go out just for weekends because that would probably require you to be staying within your home state and within range of your home. And you can't really expect they're going to be great gigs every weekend within a radius of 200 miles, whatever it is. So you're probably going to have to go further afield. My life has changed lately a lot because my partner and I just had a baby son this year.
So congratulations.
Thank you. That clearly is going to affect the amount of touring that I can do. On the other hand, the need to bring in revenue is all the greater. So there's a balancing act going on between the need to be at home and the need to make a living.
If you are enjoying this podcast, can you pause for a moment to like, review, and subscribe? Please help the world discover our music community and the wonderful artists we support. Your feedback makes a difference.
I think the longer you are on the road, I used to go on the road for months, and the longer you are on the road, the higher the risk is, because your costs get very high if you're on the road for several months, and you may not be certain to make them back. So it's better to limit your tours to in my opinion, is 2 or 3 weeks, because your costs are going to be pretty manageable. But you can still fill those 3 weeks with a lot of gigs. Some people would play every night in 3 weeks. I couldn't do that, but about a month is a maximum for me, certainly.
Okay. And then you prefer to play, what, maybe 4 shows a week?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different, but my voice, I don't like to work it too hard, because it's no fun to sing with an exhausted voice. But having said that, every musician knows that the more time you spend on the road, generally speaking, the more limber your voice becomes. So it gets easier. But I just find playing live really exhausting. I'm sure you do too. You put a hell of a lot into it. I think any performer does. And to do it more than 4 times a week for me would be very, very hard. Even if you weren't singing, I think, because you've got to remember you're driving. I drive up to 40 hours in a week. When I'm on the road. Yeah. That's a bad week, but it can be 40 hours of driving. To play 4 shows as well that's a heavy load. We're not getting any younger, Maybe in my youth I could do that, but not anymore. So I think yes, 4 shows would be my maximum personally. Yeah.
All right, so let's try something. Let's say that you're talking to a brand new artist at Listening Room Network. Let's say, what are the top 3 tips, or what would you tell them if you wanted to make sure they got a good start with our website?
Well, I often do have that conversation, because in fact I've told a lot of people about the website. Well, I would say first of all, you've got to work on your material. You've got to have a good 2 hours worth of very strong material that's going to hold people's attention, even when you're playing solo. You've got to work on your relationship with the audience. You've got to interact with the audience. You can't be one of these performers like Bob Dylan who comes on and turns his back, or Van Morrison. They can afford to do that. We can't. You won't be asked back if you do that. You've got to have good audience skills. And what would be the third? To remember that really you're there to give people a good time. It's not a theatre gig where you can go out and play your dark material about your failed suicide attempt, whatever it was. It's essentially a party, and the people are there. They don't want to be reminded of politics. They want to be made to feel good. I think that's fair enough, because it is a party. You save your political stuff for the folk coffee houses and the festivals. House concerts are a very specific context, and where people really want to have a good time. So I think those are 3 things I would mention. Just make sure your chops, are right up there. Make sure your playing chops and your singing chops are constantly tuned.
So let's see if we can get shift over to maybe just a more geekier version of it. Physically using the site when you decide you want to start booking a tour on the website. What are some of the steps that you would describe that are important?
I follow the same itinerary almost every year, which is kind of like a slow clockwise rotation of America, because I like to go where the weather is going to be kind to me. I can't afford to go to Florida in a hurricane season. I don't want to be in California when the forest fires are raging. I don't want to be in Minnesota in the middle of winter, because you risk cancellation. So you've got to pick the places where the weather is going to be mild. So you're not going to risk bad roads, people cancelling for any reason. Start off with what we all call an anchor gig, the anchor gig where you're going to make maybe $1,000. Because once you've got that anchor gig in place, you can start adding your pickup gigs, the crappy gigs that we all have to play midweek, coffee houses, wine bars, whatever it might be. You start filling in the dots around that anchor gig, And then within a couple of weeks, you've got 4 or 5 gigs lined up maybe, and the tour starting to take shape. And you can see where you might be able to add gigs a little further afield or not, where you might need to get home for a while, to recharge. But it really just grows from there. And forward planning is really key. Some hosts book more than a year in advance. Some don't, but plenty of them do. So you've got to think way ahead of yourself all the time.
When people ask me how far ahead should I be asking people for shows, I tell them, of course, there's a lot of variety. Like you said, Some of them book more than 12 months out, but some of them might have joined last week and they're looking to book their first show within a few months. But I tell people that the sweet spot is like 4 to 8 months out. Would you agree with that? 4 to 8 months?
Definitely, I would, but there are some that look much further ahead. It's possible to say to a host, I'm looking for a gig 18 months from now. When would be a good time to contact you about a possible gig at that time? Sometimes they don't read the message carefully. They think I'm asking them for a date, but I'm not. What I'm saying is essentially, how far do you like to book ahead? And
Right.
they're not always very helpful, to be honest, some hosts. I wish they would just say, yeah, we always book 3 months in advance. So this is the time you're going to need to contact me. And there's nothing more frustrating, as you know, than to hit them back, at the specified date, only to find they've already given the gig away. That happens a lot. But
Right. And I think so many of them shoot from the hip, right? It's not their job. They don't quite have a system yet.
no,
And they're just kind of making it up. Some of them they only book a show when the right artist shows up at the right time in their inbox.
house concert hosts, by definition, they're not professionals. So their plans may change, and quite often that happens, as you know. They'll say, "Well, we decided to go on vacation." That wouldn't happen with a mainline venue. But that's one of the disadvantages of house concerts. But I think the advantages greatly outweigh the disadvantages, certainly. But timing is a very difficult thing to get right, anyway.
So how do you stay organized in terms of keeping track of when you need to reach out to a particular host? Do you have a CRM database? Do you just use Google Sheets? What's your main tool for staying
No, I
organized?
find that just writing it down in my engagement book, on a given date, contact Marcus at Live on Amaranth in California. I make a date on September 21st, contact him about a gig 1 year down the line.
And you're saying you're writing this down.
Yeah, just write it down. Yeah, I like to write it down in my engagement book. But there are, as you mentioned, many tools people can use. I've never found the need for them because, my itinerary is fairly easy to handle. It's not like a businessman's calendar, and I can. It's not like I'm juggling lunch meetings and dinner meetings all day long. There's plenty of scope just to write things down in my diary.
Okay, so that's old school. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because there's one of the things that I was starting to do some research at Folk Alliance and around that conference and reaching out to artists about how they stay organized.
Yeah.
And I was blown away that so few of them are using technical tools. They're using a Google spreadsheet most of the time. So one of the things that we did on the site, you might recall, is that when you find a host or a venue on the site and it's clear that you want to play there, but now is not the time to reach out, you can set a reminder. And we'll email you on whatever date. Hey, you wanted to reach out to Live on Amaranth on this date.
Right.
So those are the little things that we try to do. But in terms of response rates, right? That's one of the biggest challenges. It's really one of the things that's created the most work for me in terms of how do we fix this? How do we get hosts and venues to be more responsible? And that's not to say that they're less responsible in our network than they would be otherwise, but how do we improve response rates? And we kind of have a system to at least track it. Have you found some tricks there for your own self in terms of what works better to get a response, whether it's pitching a particular date or sort of a general time?
Well, ideally, you'd find out about the venue and get an impression of exactly what they're looking for, and perhaps if you think a particular song is going to appeal to them more than another, and you would use that in your submission. But it isn't really very clear very often what their tastes are. It's a bit of a shot in the dark, I think. But you can glean a certain amount by looking at the reviews and the artists that they've had. I mean, I know most of the artists now on the Listening Room network. I think I've met them all, almost. And so if I see that they booked Rough and Tumble, for example, who's good friends of mine, we're not really ploughing the same furrow, Rough and Tumble and me. I love them dearly, but we're not doing the same kind of thing. So that would be a sort of red light for me, Whereas if someone had booked, should we say Jesse Terry, one example, or Aaron English, they might. It's more likely they'll go for my stuff, and I feel happy about just giving them my boilerplate submission.
So that's good. So you're actually really paying close attention to the previous bookings that a host has had in order to see if they're a good lead for you.
Yeah, and if they're booking a Cajun band or a bluegrass band, I know they're not going to, like me, I mean, whatever they may say on their profile, and their profile doesn't say very much usually. Sometimes it's very detailed, but often it's not.
It brings to mind, I'm going to grab this. I don't know how to look on the camera, but I'm going to grab this. Hold on.
Yeah, carry on.
So as you know, we have a cartoonist named Roy Schneider, who's a wonderful singer-songwriter. But he has, in a former life, he was a syndicated cartoonist, and
Really?
I've hired him on several occasions to do some house concert cartoons for me.
Okay.
And the series is called Carnegie Small, and we started this, I don't know, at least 10 years ago. This one he did in 2009, but yeah, I'll come up with sort of a funny concept that sort of highlights some of the stuff in the house concert world, and then I get him to draw it. To riff on the topic that you were just brought up, it's me over here on the left, and I'm asking the host, what kind of music do you like? And the husband says, oh, we like everything.
Right.
And the wife is standing behind him. And so I ask him, oh, do you like jazz? No. Do you like country? No. Do you like blues? No, not really. And you see the wife is seeing what I'm seeing. Is like, okay, this guy's not as wide open as he claims to be. And she says, or so I say, so what do you like? And he goes, oh, anything. And the wife takes over. She's like, okay, my turn. So the idea is that a lot of people think they're wide open, that they just love everything. But when it comes down to certainly booking it in their home, they become fussy in a hurry.
Certainly, I find a very marked difference between the partners sometimes. It's clear to me that one is really the host, the other one is there on sufferance, quite often. But often it's the one who does the housework who's not so keen on the idea, of bringing 50 people into our home.
Yeah, the husband-wife team is sometimes a strained relationship when it comes to the house concerts. Yeah. Although it is fun, like some of them actually, really gravitate to one part of the hosting that they love so much, and one person's really about the food, and the other's really about the technical aspect, and they want to make sure the sound is great and the light is great. So we have all kinds, so to speak.
You have to bear in mind the fact that the host is being very generous. Too many artists, make a fuss if the audience if the numbers aren't good enough. If they show up and they've got a small crowd, a small house, sometimes the artists will refuse to play, or they'll just sulk. And I feel that that's not appropriate because, these hosts are doing this for love. And they're being very generous, opening their home to us. They're not a professional venue where they're creaming, 50% off for the bar and the door. So we just it's not appropriate for us to complain when the numbers aren't right. In my experience, the next night will be different. You'll probably make up the numbers the next night on the road. So just let it go and enjoy being there. That's what I always would say to other artists, certainly,
Yeah, that's the challenge. Is of course, as an artist, you want to raise your own standards every year. You want to get better, and certainly you want to play venues and house concerts that are successful, right? That they bring in at least
crowds,
some standard that you're seeking. And if you don't weigh that as a factor, you're not going to do well. But there is something about being gracious, recognizing the work that people put into this, and recognizing that there's going to be a failure rate. There's a certain number of people who, as desperately as they want to do this, are unable to build an audience for it. Sometimes have to resort to only booking artists that have an audience for them to be successful. And that's one of the challenges of the whole house concert world. These really kind, motivated people who feel like they're doing everything, and yet they can't build or sustain an audience.
I've been there so many times, man.
Yeah. So kudos to you for keeping your chin up. I know that's the British way. But I think it's a telltale sign of why you've been so successful in our network, being able to be gracious under disappointing circumstances.
Well, thank you. On that note, I always say that music is not a career. It's a vocation. And for me, the difference is you can't look at the bottom line all the time. Every gig is worth playing. You just have to find that reason. If the audience isn't big, there's another reason to play the gig. You could try out new songs, whatever it might be, try a whole new repertoire, and that will make the gig worthwhile. It's not just the bottom line. It can't just be the bottom line. And that's why music is, it's a calling. It's not just a career. It's more than a career.
Yeah, I like that. I think that, again, back to the comedian analogy, these comedians that sell out theaters and make $1 million a show, they still go out to the clubs to try out new material, to stay hungry, to sharpen their skills. Mm-hmm. And they don't complain about it. They don't have to do it to pay the bills. Right. They do it because it's a tool to help them sharpen their skill set. So I think that's a really great way for artists to see these down nights. What silver linings can I find in this situation?
Absolutely, yeah.
And certainly house concerts and normal gigs provide plenty of opportunity for you to wing it.
Yourself. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, Rupert, thanks so much for your time. I've been looking forward to doing this. I was thinking at some point we should do an article about, sort of Rupert's top 10 tips, because you have done such a great job of booking yourself through the website for so long. And it's wonderful to see your success. And I'm eager to share what you've learned with our broader audience. So
thank you.
We'll link to your website and make sure people can find you and check out your music. Mm-hmm. Is there one particular record you want to point to?
Yep, my new CD, which I recorded in New York 2 months ago. It's called Lamentations. Definitely my favorite, and it's also, as my last two CDs have been just me and the guitar, so it's very close to what I do in a house concert situation. There's no overdubs, there's no extra musicians. It's just me and the guitar, and I'm getting closer and closer all the time. The recordings and the live work together. There's no longer really a distinction between those two things, and it's very much the repertoire that I play on the road, day in, day out. So to get back to I think the word that you used earlier on, it's the most authentic of my CDs, probably.
Super. Well, Rupert, I look forward to seeing you here in St. Petersburg next time you come through Florida. I'm sure it won't be August or September.
I've got some gigs lined up in January, but God knows whether they're going to happen or not.
Yeah, everything's dicey at this point, but things are starting to look better, at least for the spring. So,
good.
We're seeing some enthusiasm there.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Fran. I appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye, Rupert.
Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Fran Snyder Podcast. Please subscribe, like, or share to help your friends discover this community. Also, I'd love to hear from you with any feedback or suggestions you have. And if you'd like to learn more about house concerts and listening rooms around the world, please visit and join listeningroomnetwork.com. You can email me from there. See you next time on the Fran Snyder Podcast.